This will be the part 3 of 3 parts for each of the 10 elements. And so now we will be on the last leg for the indirect resource. So as a quick recap to what we have covered from the top on first of the part 1. Resource, of course, here would generally be positive. The resource element is the one that produces the cell. And usually, of course, we would prefer direct stars. So in the past literature, we would prefer the direct stars, and the indirect stars are often, sometimes they are also known as harmful gods, as they like to call it. But we can always just call it elements, because these are just the dramatized version of trying to say something that's supernatural, or something that is more beyond the physical self. Okay, so the indirect stars, of course, would be the inauspicious ones, which will include number 1, rob wealth, which will be your hurting officer, which of course will be your indirect wealth, your 7K. And of course, for today's topic, the indirect resource. Now, indirect resource in the first impression is normally negative. So most of the readings for today tends to show that it is not something that is welcomed by the metaphysicians of the past. Now here, would you like to take a guess whether the indirect resource would be more negative when it comes to male or female? Which one do you think would be the gender that would be more negatively affected? And so more often than not, it will be the female. The female. The indirect resource counters. The indirect resource counters the children. Because for female day masters, output will be the children. And so indirect resource counters children. And so when reading for female clients, if the question arises that the woman would like to conceive, the woman would like to bear children, and whether there will be any luck for it. And usually in the reading, if indirect resource pops up, then the answer would be in the negative. So we normally read difficulty for conceiving. That would be number 1. The other part also denotes that the indirect resource weakens. So it weakens. And in the weakening cycle, what does it weaken? It weakens the direct officer. So in that case, it weakens the husband. Right, so between male and female, normally indirect resource, the reading would be more negative for female day masters. So for male, not so bad. So for male, the reading tends to be more towards the spiritual side. So the indirect resource represents, well, it represents metaphysics itself. It represents things that are beyond. Basically, the word metaphysics just means beyond the boundary of physics. So therefore, indirect resource people have very high EQ, emotional quotient, because they tend to be able to understand things that are not direct, things that are unconventional. Therefore, they're able to determine human relationships better. They tend to be intelligent. They tend to look for things that are not within the mainstream. Right? So therefore, when we look into indirect resource, we can see that it pertains to things that are spiritual, things that are also, of course, has mentioned things that goes beyond the physics. And when we say physics, of course, we mean the scientific world, or the world of natural phenomena. Okay, now as we now come to the last part, as we often do, we now look into the pillars. And the pillars that we refer to are those that are sitting on. So we will see those pillars that are sitting on. And so one by one, we'll go through how does it decipher. So here, as we look into the first one, indirect resource sitting on direct officer. So indirect resource sitting on direct officer will be number one, once again, for female day master, direct officer represents husband, and indirect resource weakens, right? It weakens and diminishes the direct officer. So it would be largely deemed to be inauspicious for a strong day master. So if we follow the traditional reading that a strong day master doesn't welcome self and doesn't welcome resource. Therefore, resource becomes inauspicious. So that is the general reading. And of course, for weekday masters need support, and indirect resource is resource. Therefore, it provides nurturing. As it provides nurturing, it is of course a more merciless type of nurturing, more like a stepmother type, more like a strict headmaster, or things that are those or a military sergeant, drill sergeant, the kind of tough love that shapes the person. Therefore, that would be just how we look into the pillar when it is indirect resource sitting on direct officer. But more often than not, it is considered that the direct officer is diminished, it is robbed, and of course, direct officer represents the boss. So it represents the position, authority, status. So direct officer symbolizes status, it symbolizes authority, and therefore indirect resource sitting on direct officer represents a person whose authority status would be undermined. And normally, of course, for female, it represents the husband and it is being hurt. It is being right. So that would be just the general reading when we look into what happens when we have an indirect resource sitting on direct officer. So let's take a look into this day master, shall we? Where do we find the pillar indirect resource sitting on direct officer? Okay, so right now on this chart, we see that the month pillar. So you can find that it is on a month pillar. So first of all, let's run through the checklist quickly as what we often do. This will be a sin metal day master. Sin metal born in the month of the snake. Snake would be summer. Therefore, has sin metal born in summer. The sin metal is weak. Weak. As there is no rooting, we are referring to now a weak day master. If we have a weak day master, and what will be the indirect resource for a sin day master? We'll see that it will come in the form of the G earth. And the G earth is strong. So in this context, we can find that there is a positive, favorable outlook. Where we find that we have the indirect resource which is strong against a weak master that is weak. And this sin metal is not rooted, or not that we know, because we don't have the hour pillar. And so this indirect resource sits on direct officer. So it's the indirect resource sitting on the direct officer. First and foremost, we are referring to a sin metal. Now, the sin metal enjoys or welcome, has the characteristic of the sin metal is to seek attention, vanity, publicity. So the sin metal doesn't really welcome the G earth, because G earth is by right the earth that covers the metal, that it clouds its shine. But nonetheless, we can find that has an indirect resource, GF. Now, GF people are talkative. So normally GF people tends to talk. It's quite a talkative kind of a personality. So having a GF contributes to stem, this person have a silver tongue, or this person can have the gift of the gab or can talk. And furthermore, indirect resource is unconventional, has an unconventional element. We do find that there are many good indirect resource people that are comedians. They are comedians. They can, well, basically, if you have listened to many, you have looked into many comedies, especially stand-up comedies, you'll find that one of the things that they have is to be able to bring up issues that makes people laugh at themselves or laugh at the world. So therefore, these comedians are pretty much smart people, because for them to bring up topics that the general mainstream doesn't, and then to make people laugh at certain points which about themselves or something funny, making a satire is definitely one of the skill set of an indirect resource. So indirect resource can do that. So one of the powers of indirect resource is to be able to reach out to people's deep sense of identity. So that's why they either become spiritual leaders, they become cult leaders, or they become comedians, because these are people who are able to stir up something that is emotional. And therefore, here we have this person by the name of Anthony John Hancock, which has made known to become a comedian, and he has his career has. Therefore, once again, we refer to the man pillar to be the peak pillar for the person's life as they enter into society, and therefore that's your career pillar. Career. Now, on another note, we do find that this person has a rat and a rabbit. So, what do we find in a rat and rabbit relationship? In a rat and rabbit relationship, we do find uncivilized punishment. Uncivilized punishment, and not only that, the uncivilized punishment also come in the form of peach blossom stars. So both the rat and the rabbit are peach blossoms, and peach blossoms tends to denote something about the opposite sex, about sexual related issues. And so here we can find that this person may have multiple partners or may find themselves in failed marriages. And usually, again, as we now look at the pillar, indirect resource sitting on direct officer in a summary kind of a reading may also denote what we call it looks better than it actually is. The indirect resource tends to denote that you look better, that you have this white mark, that everything is good and everything is rosy, but deep down inside, you can find that there are troubles boiling into the person. Right. So anyway, to to find that this person very popular during the 60s as a comedian on television, we'll find that there is a bit of a depressed alcoholism that the person suffers from. And usually, of course, again, one of the manifestation of the indirect resource is solitude. Solitude, loneliness, and solitude tends to be a characteristics of this person. And so you'll find that at the end, you can see that this person sadly has committed suicide. Right. We take a look into the next one, which is indirect resource sitting on 7. Now you find that these are going to be ruthless and merciless. Ruthless and merciless. Now here we can find that there are two versions, or I wouldn't say two versions, but we'll find whether we are referring to 7 killing sitting on indirect resource. This can be quite dangerous because 7 killing represents that aggressive persona, that gangster persona, the fighter persona sitting on indirect resource, indicating that the person is very smart, very cunning, and therefore this becomes basically a smooth criminal. Smooth criminal. On the other hand, we now have an indirect resource sitting on 7K. And so likewise, the person would be quite merciless as well. But of course, what entails is indirect resource. So here is a bit different. Yeah. I mean, if you are referring to a 7 killing sitting on indirect resource, the 7 killing is the one that is protruded to the stem. So this may be more like a very cunning criminal, a cunning criminal. And while this one is the indirect resource is the one, therefore it is more of an aggressive thinker in a way, an aggressive thinker. So the sitting on becomes it, because the one that is protruded to the stems are the one that is being seen by the world, or that is the external uh, persona or character, the characters of the person. Therefore, here we are referring to indirect resource. So the person is a resource person. So indirect resource is still a resource person. But then it sits on 7K, and this basically denote a criminally minded person. Hopefully, the person ends up on the good side of the law rather than on the other side, as it is. But nonetheless, we would normally prefer indirect resource to be hidden and not appearing to the steps. Right. So one way or the other, usually when it's indirect resource sitting on 7 killing, it is not usually considered to be auspicious, and the person tends to be superficial, tends not to care about money, because 7 killing is very much aggressively a risk taker. So being a risk taker, having the inexperience of overexpansion and financial losses tends to be expected. So more often than not, we would treat this pillar to be negative, as it is. The indirect resource sitting on 7 killing. Now, overall, the 10 elements, if your memory is too short and you cannot remember too many things, it may be safer to lean on the negative side, as it is. All right, now let's take a look into indirect resource sitting on direct resource. Indirect resource sitting on direct resource definitely represents intelligence. It depends, of course, on the strength, and usually between indirect resource and direct resource, we would always consider that it is better if it's clearly that one is better than the other. One that's better. And if one is better than the other, then we may find that this person will excel in academic and intellectual pursuits, because both of them are intelligent, resource, sitting on resource. However, if it is not clear, if it is not clear that one is clearly dominant than the other, then the concern is indecisive, because the ideas tends to be conflicting. Direct resource belief in scientific approach. Indirect believes in metaphysical approach. Direct resource belief in rational. Indirect resource leans to emotional. Direct resource wants quantitative evidence. Indirect resource prefers qualitative evidence. And therefore, they just don't seem to That means in their thinking, in their approach, in their way of collecting data and processing information, they are just different. And of course, it is good to have both. So that is why indirect resource and direct resource can exist. But if they are just not clearly one stronger than the other, they just tend to be stuck in the middle. Stuck in the middle. And so that's where they become hesitant, they are not consistent, and they don't produce something that is then useful. So for in this case, we consider that when we look into indirect resource, sitting on direct resource, we want to pick it up. Now this story was made last session in part 2. So that's where we find that we have then a person that has an indirect resource sitting on direct resource. And then here we may want to establish if one is better than another. And so here we find that the horse month is the summer month. So as a result, fire is peak. So the indirect resource is very strong. It's very strong. Right. Nonetheless, you also find that, well, again, indirect resource tends to make a person a comedian, tends to be smart, and of course tends to move into things that are here. So it may appear that the indirect resource appears to be stronger, as it may be the sun. Now, in a way, uh, I don't know what is the hour. I do not know what is the hour. But looking into the life of the person, looking into the things that he have dabbled, and apparently what appears to be stronger, which one do you think appears to be more dominant in his life? His career building up as a comedian, looking into the studies of criminology and sociology. Which of these two do you feel or do you guess that may be more dominant? Indirect resource, very good. So if that's the case, would you like to hazard? If you were to guess his hour, because these are fire, remember? For fire, if the pink fire is more dominant, it may appear that this person is born during the day. It's born during the day. As he's born during the day, the pink fire is more dim. It doesn't shine as much. And of course, if the person is born at night, then it may be more clearer. It may be clear that the person pink fire will then shines brighter, as it is. So that's where we want to consider depends. But one or the other, you can use both. You can use both. Using both, of course, means a person will have direct resource that is smart, and also indirect resource that leans towards the things that are unconventional. So we find that this will be how one can read the chart of that pillar, indirect resource, sitting on direct resource. Okay, now this one will be a pure pillar, of course. Indirect resource sitting on indirect resource. Indirect resource sitting on indirect resource, pure pillar would not be positive, regardless of the strength, and especially for those who rely on hurting officer. So if the hurting officer is the output star that you rely on, meaning that if hurting officer is the useful god, the useful element, then we find that the indirect resource will counter and clash the hurting officer. So then we'll take it out. And hurting officer tends to be extrovert. Hurting officer is extrovert. Indirect resource is introvert. And so when we find that the indirect resource clashes against the hurting officer, it then takes away the creativity. It makes the person, it makes the hurting officer negative. It makes the characteristics of the negative characteristics of the hurting officer to become more apparent. So therefore, that would be usually one that tends to challenge authority, argumentative, not a team player, and tend to find that this brings the inauspicious characteristics out for the person. Right. As we move on to the next one, and I think we did talk about this. So this will be where we find the indirect resource sitting on indirect resource. So as a year pillar, we'll find that there are expectedly we find unstable a pillar contributing or hurting to the generally to the office as well. And so we did talk about this person in the last period. As indirect resource sitting on direct wealth. In a way, direct wealth controls. And so as we look into the chart, now we find that the direct wealth controls. As wealth elements controls the resource. And herb and element. Therefore, we do find here that this now brings about something that is generally favorable. As the indirect resource is able to benefit, that means the negative aspects of the indirect resource will be controlled by the direct wealth, and the direct wealth will be able to provide. So this would actually, in a way, indicate that that they may be what we call an unexpected success in the industry of creativity. So in this context, we want to look for what is useful for the indirect resource, which is direct wealth. So in a way, we can say that money can buy for so as reading. This direct wealth, of course, means use money, use work to actually achieve the positive aspect of the indirect resource. And therefore, as a result, this would be very useful if the day master is strong. So we find day master that is strong, then the day master will benefit from it. And therefore, this alignment is deemed to be highly auspicious. So we find indirect resource sitting on direct wealth to be, of all these elements, one of the better ones. Now, next, let's take a look into the indirect resource sitting on direct wealth. And indirect wealth also, of course, controls, but the indirect wealth becomes something of a servant killing. So, generally, we do find that, again, if the indirect resource is considered to be unfavorable, then we can find that the indirect wealth also provide positive or opportunity. So this would be the kind of a feeling that there is a turning adversity into opportunity. And again, it is also another sign that is highly auspicious. And so when looking into the chart, whenever your chart has indirect resource, we would prefer the indirect resource to manifest itself more favorably if the wealth element is positive or the wealth element is strong. So if the wealth is strong, then it's able to exert control over the indirect resource, and this would then curbs the area. And of course, for a reading, if it is back to the female, then this is This will be the solution, of course, which is then use money. Use money, of course, means use the wealth star. Use the wealth star to control the indirect resource. And once the indirect resource is controlled, this means basically to increase, especially for the female, the children, and husband. In a way, okay, I'm writing in very badly constructed English. Maybe it's nearer to how it sounds Chinese in a way. The kind of a luck, the children luck or the husband luck, if one want to consider that. So therefore, use wealth element, activate wealth in order to curb to the resource. Therefore, this will be the case of the solution or the remedy that comes in. Okay, so the question is, of course, is when what would be the remedy if one has indirect resource that is negative. That's negative in the chart. All right, as we move along, let's come into the indirect resource sitting on hurting office. Indirect resource clashes with the hurting officer. It controls it. Therefore, in the first part, it will not be considered to be auspicious. Not considered. So we do argue that hurting officer and eating god are output elements that makes money. And therefore, such conflict would be expected to result in financial losses, results in conflicts, and it gives disharmony to businesses. And when one look into it, it's also unfavorable for business ventures. And so if the person asks, should I do business? No, no. Having an indirect resource sitting on hurting officer should not venture into businesses, should not venture into, in a way, being on your own, because it will tend to result in financial losses. Indirect resource is poor in financial management, and hurting officer tends to spend money. And therefore, indirect resource sitting on hurting officer may tend to be people, management who spend money, spend money inefficiently, spend money ineffectively, or spend money which is without much return. So if we get somebody who is an indirect resource sitting on hurting officer, chances are the person will spend money on things that are not core business. They tend to be not spending money on things that do not generate wealth. So therefore, they tend to spend money on non-value generating ventures. In a way, indirect resource are weird people, weird and peculiar, and hurting. So therefore, indirect resource sitting on hurting officer makes them a poor investor, because as an investor, they will tend to be more fascinated about unconventional stock selection. So they wouldn't buy the darlings of today. They wouldn't go, they're not momentum traders that go for NVIDIA, semiconductor, generative AI investments. These people will tend to go into fallen angels, startups. They go into investments that appears to be strange, because indirect resource tends to look for all these uh, unconventional type of businesses. So they get excited about startups, about some crazy ideas that has a higher chance of failure than. Therefore, indirect resource sitting on hurting officer makes a very poor investor. So they're not very good. So as a result, they tend to bring more financial losses because of. So what happens if you're indirect resource sitting on hurting officer, especially in the hour pillar? Then one thing is don't invest directly. Don't make investment decisions. Rely on third party. Rely on unit trust, ETFs, or passive investment. Just to be fearful that you tend to favor unconventional investments, which may not generate that return. Yeah, as it is. Okay, so here we find a chart that refers to the first richest lady in the United States, an heiress who inherited wealth from tremendously a very rich family, Christina Onassis. Well, let's take a look into a chart and see that though blessed with wealth, she does find her chart to be quite one that has adversity. So in the first instance, let's go through from the beginning. We are referring to a Keng metal day master, a Keng metal born in winter, on the peak of winter, where metal is autumn and autumn has recently descended or declined. Therefore, the energy is weak. So this is a weak day master. Is there rooting? Can you find whether this day master is rooted? The day master is rooted in the Keng metal, in the hour. Yes, Jenny? Rooted in the hour pillar, which is in death and emptiness. So generally, this day master is weaker. Now, if it is weaker, then it may tend to welcome resource and is welcoming this indirect resource. So as we speak on the topic of indirect resource, we do find that we have it in the month pillar, the indirect resource sitting on Koi water hurting officer. So this will be an indirect resource sitting on hurting officer pillar. And we do find that this pillar is also an unstable pillar. Wu Earth sitting on water. When Earth sits on water, when mountain sits on yin water, it's also an unstable pillar. The last time we have this was the global financial crisis of 2008. Oh, sorry. This one was earlier on, I believe. So if not mistaken, it was an earlier crisis. And so nonetheless, we do see that this would represent quite a pillar that is not favorable for her. So in the first instance, we can see as we read along, her life is the one thing, the one thing about her being born rich. She does find that the people that surrounds her are those that would seek fortune from her. And so she will say that her life is filled with afflicted with unhappiness. There was a failure of marriage, target for fortune hunters. But in a way, as we consider hurting officer, anyway, she is also one that sits on indirect resource. Believe us. So therefore, she has a day master that sits on indirect resource. And one thing also, what else can you observe? She has the water. She has the water direction. What do you mean that we have the water direction? What is the water combination? The water combination would be what would it be? That's right. Shen, G, Chen. Therefore, you have the red, you have the Shen, you have the Chen. Therefore, this would be water combination. Okay, so therefore here, we find that she has the water combination produces water, and she's born right at the peak of winter. And so we can find, and then there's also water here. Therefore, this is a chart that shows metal, a metal chart that has excessive metal, excessive water. Therefore, this day master would drown in resource, drown in resource that makes resource negative. So once it makes resource negative, this would be resource represents comfort. It represents wealthy people as well, and therefore, but this would be a chart that shows metal drowned in water is excessive. So we find that this chart has a lot of metal. It has a lot of metal, and it has also a lot of water. Yeah. So metal and water elements are two dominant. Right. So as we consider hurting officer hurts direct officer. So hurting officer clashes against direct officer. Can you say anywhere where there is any direct officer in this chart? Do we find direct officer anywhere in this chart? None. There's no direct officer in this chart. And therefore, hurting officer hurts. Can we find 7 killing? Yep, we have a small 7 killing here. But the 7 killing is hidden into this branch, into the year. But when you consider the indirect resource, we can see that there's indirect resource here, indirect resource here, indirect resource here, indirect resource here. And therefore we find that the day master has 4 indirect resources. Again, we are not into counting. Yes, the owl is miserable. Correct. Of course, we don't count for the mere sake of counting, but it does shows that she has indirect resource throughout her life, throughout the year, the month, the day, and the hour. So we find that indirect resource is a persisting theme, persisting presence. So indirect resource against weakens, indirect resource weakens officer. Indirect resource weakens office. Indirect resource counters output, counters output. And so again, the reading for a female day master, weakens officer means weakened husband. So weakened husband indicates that she would find it difficult, find it very difficult to actually find a person who has a husband or a partner who can lead her to a very happy relationship, because the indirect resource weakens. And it counters output, so it counters output. Therefore, it counters children. And therefore, female day masters will find it difficult to actually conceive. So therefore, underwent countless tests of fertility studies. If the indirect resource only appears in the luck pillar is about time. So, but of course, 10 years. In the wrong 10 years for a lady, it can be also tremendously very difficult. But after 10 years, the luck pillar passes, her fertility, luck may come in. But of course, for Christina Onassis, the indirect resource persists throughout. So therefore, this where, of course, she has wealth, and so she used her money and being very persistent she finally conceived a daughter through a medical procedure. So therefore, she has to go through those days in the way back into the 60s and 70s. So we find that the fertility wasn't too sophisticated yet. But anyway, that was what she has gone through. All right, so she suffered 4 failed marriages, and she has went through multiple fertility procedures to finally conceive one daughter that she truly, truly loved. And so she passed away before she was 40. I think she passed away when she was 38 years old, as it is. Therefore, here we see this would be, in a way, the reading for where how the indirect resource is generally read as harmful. Read as harmful. And here we may then make it a bit more dramatic to say that the earth covers the metal. The earth wants to bury the metal. Earth burying the metal, and the water is also very strong to drown the metal. And therefore, despite her being the first richest lady in the United States, it does not appear that her life has brought her too much happiness, in a way. Right. As we look into the next one, let's take a look into indirect resource sitting on eating God. Here comes the part where the saying, of course, is that the owl steals the food. So as I introduced into the first, the owl. So the owl steals the food. The food being the eating God, and indirect resource being the owl. And therefore, usually it will be inauspicious regardless of day master. And if the day master is strong, the eating God is strong, it's even more negative. More negative. Therefore, there's a lot of emotional suppression, extremism, pervasiveness. Now, indirect resource is introvert. Eating God is also introvert. So these two signs are introverted symbolism. So one is lonely. The other, of course, tends to be more also to be shy from societies, to be shy from having too much contact with society, in a way. And therefore, here once again, eating God represents financial opportunities, the ability to make money, and also the same with hurting officer. The women, the risk of childbirth complications may also be seen, separation or loss concerning children. So the reading may also symbolizes miscarriages as the owl steals the baby away, because eating God is children, or child for the lady. And so this may be also the reading, especially when it's a pillar or when it is a particular year. And so let's come to another chart that we can read here. Richard Jenny or Richard John Colangelo, comedian. So we'll find that indirect resource has the pillar tends to be, so once you have an indirect resource as your career, what you make good of it would be comedian, spiritual leader, cult, investigator. So either you use intelligence based creativity in this role as well. And so once again, we find that indirect resource makes good comedians, not bad. And here we find there is an indirect resource sitting on eating God. Sitting on eating God. So this would be a pink fire day master, born in spring, strong. So therefore this day master is strong. And spring, of course, we'll find that this is the month pillar would be wood dragon. So wood is pig. Therefore, strong indirect resource against a strong day master, both unrooted, would find that it's generally not positive. And of course, the tree Jiachena, which is also coincidentally this year, would then be wood dragon, would be the tree gripping on the earth. So we can say that tree gripping the earth would also find himself having things, having hidden emotional problems. And also it doesn't help to find that dragon, and dragon also represents self-punishment. Self-punishment. That's right. So self-punishment between self. And therefore, and these are all hidden, of course. So that's the thing about indirect resource, controlling eating God, and also Fuyin for this year, if you would like to say that as well. Well, he passed away. He committed suicide. So therefore, again, by shooting himself when he was depressed for that one. And therefore, here we then tend to see that again, indirect resource is about the mind. Therefore, resource about the mind. Therefore, it's about mental. So it's about mental. And eating God is also quite negative. So this would be considered to be a negative pillar. So that's why this year is also not a fantastic year, because Jia Chen would be. So you can see that this. So in a way, for Pink Day Master for this year, Jia Chen is also indirect resource sitting on eating God. So contributing to events. So what kind of events do we contribute again? So we consider that they are unhappy. That they are unhappy. I'm sure you may realize by now that being a comedian, being a comedian is is not something like a happy job. You do find that there are quite a good number of comedians that have also fallen into mental anguish and depression. You can also find that. That's quite odd to find. Alright, so therefore here we see that the indirect resource sitting on eating God would have that emotional suppression, unhappiness, and they feel that there are a lot of setbacks and they're not happy with themselves. They feel disappointed. So even though on the surface it looks apparent auspicious, apparently they look auspicious, but generally they have a lot of sometimes what we call unshared problems. So therefore this is where we may also say what we call unshareable. Sorry, unshareable problems. Or more importantly, what we call perceive. Because it is in the mind of the person that perceive that they have problems, and problems that they cannot share. And when people have perceived unshareable problems, therefore that leads them into internal depression. And internal depression then tends to be things that are more social. So in a way, if we do have if you have children, you have friends, families who manifest that they're this pillar, indirect resource sitting on eating God, this is quite negative, quite negative. And so it would be very important that the remedy for this is to take away the perception, and of course take away the and so the remedy is to find ways to make this person knows that their problems are shareable, and that you share their problems with them to actually allow them to heal, allow them to contribute. Because on the surface, they are comedians. They make people laugh. They make people feel good because they can reach out. But deep inside, they have this particular uh, particular internal, perceived unshareable problems which they don't really know how to handle. And therefore, that brings about their characteristics. So that's the thing about comedian. Huh? You see, comedians tends to bring issues out for people to laugh. And the reason why we laugh at all these jokes is because all these issues are dark. That so it's about satire. Satire brings about how to make something dark into something that is lighter. Therefore, that will be their skills, but they themselves suffer from this particular issue as well. All right, so therefore, I go. All in all, we now have the indirect resource sitting on all the other 10 elements. And if you cannot remember all of them, then generally just know that most of them are negative. Yeah. Okay, now let's move on into the next one. We have the indirect resource sitting on rock wealth. Now, rock wealth star weakens the indirect resource because rock wealth weakens indirect resource. Therefore, this brings about something that is beneficial. So because of rock wealth weakens it, and so agility, cleverness, adeptness in deception. This will be another good criminal-minded people. Yeah? Rob wealth, rob people's wealth. And rob wealth, of course, are extrovert. Uh, Indirect resource sitting on rob wealth may picture a fantastic investment scam. So these people can concoct intelligent investment scam because they have this rob wealth intelligence. And therefore, if they chose the dark side to be on their livelihood, they can be very good in this. Therefore, indirect resource sitting on rock wealth will now be very positive. It's very good. This is now the good one. Changing circumstances and trends. They are very good at observing skills. Rock wealth people are very friendly. They talk to you. They make you feel like you are their best friend. That you rock wealth can make people feel that they are the most important. Rock wealth can make you feel that you are the most important person in the room. That you are the most precious one. Oh, definitely they do that because they need to rob your wealth, as it is. All right, but other than that, of course, we can find that that would be on looking into into the into the negative side. They are dominant, they are volatile because rock wealth are impulsive, rock wealth people are aggressive, and they don't make good investment because they are very impatient and impulsive too, as it is. Right now, move on to your indirect resource sitting on friend. So for weekday master, auspicious. Because again, for weekday master, you welcome resource and you welcome self. And so resource sitting on self, indirect resource sitting on friend would be auspicious. So therefore, it represents assistance because indirect resource is your querent, your benefactors, and your friend, of course, will be your partners. And therefore, they bring greater protection to to the day master. And of course, if you're a strong day master, then as we often say, then this is not so favorable. Not so favorable means you now will consider that you have a lot of conflicts and disputes, especially with business. And therefore, having friends and having resource tends to mean that you are outranked and you are overshadowed by more senior people. And therefore, that might not be something positive there. So in a way, resource sitting on friend star depends on the day master. So it depends. On the strength of the day master. So if the day master is weak, then this is auspicious. And auspicious means what? Do business. Therefore, for weekday master, this would be a business. A business person, a businessman or a businesswoman, luck, so to speak. Therefore, weekday master, this is good. What should I do? Do business. Should I do business? Yes. Should I enter into partnership? Yes. Should you have a good mentor and you have good partners who will be there with you? Do business with relatives. And of course, if you're a strong day master, then no. Then no. Don't do business. Don't go into partnerships. Unless you are happy being a minority. Unless you become a passive investor. With the exception if you do not have rock wealth. So if you don't have rock wealth, that's fine, because they're friends, they can still support you. They're still harmonious with things like that. All right, so there you go. All in all, this will be the wrap up for indirect resource. So in the next session, we'll then begin on the new element, and that would be your rock wealth star. Yeah, as it is. Okay, thank you very much for today, and good night.